The Heisei era of the Godzilla series has widely been acclaimed as the most popular era of the franchise. Whenever people think of Godzilla, this is the period they immediately point to. The special effects have gotten better, more legendary kaiju were introduced, and the battles have gotten bigger. But if you put all that to the side, you will start to notice that a great chunk of the Heisei era is rather bland and forgettable for the most part. But how can you blame almost everyone for saying that's the best in the series? Most Godzilla fans grew up with these films. Although I grew up watching the Millennium and Showa films more, I completely understand why people hold a sentimental value to this period. As kids, we don't necessarily care about what's happening. We just want to see Godzilla beat the other monster while stuff is blowing up. But at the same time, there are fans that watch Godzilla films solely for the action and special effects. Now, this video isn't about pointing fingers at anyone, but it's about something that most Godzilla fans, if not every Godzilla fan, seem to overlook. And that would be the numerous flaws of the Heisei era. The rest of the video will consist of various Godzilla YouTubers, including myself, giving our own reviews of each installment of the Heisei Godzilla era. Links will be in the description.
I'm just gonna say this outright. This is probably the best that the Heisei series has to offer. The other ones are quite good, but the film that starts it all just blows it out of the water. Granted, it still does have some flaws, but let's start positive. There are two versions of the film, both of which are fantastic. The sub, and the American dub, which actually has a nice little nod, bringing back Raymond Burr's character and having him reprise the role as Steve Martin. And a surprising fact, they wanted to make the dub into a tongue-in-cheek comedy parody, but Burr disliked the idea and took the message of the original Godzilla very seriously. So thankfully, we got the one we did. The plot of the movie actually centers around the Cold War and the fact that Godzilla may still be out there. Obviously, you get the Heisei effects you'd expect, but I'd say they're taken a bit more seriously. Not anything that you'd really see in later movies where it's really flashy and bright. It feels like a return to form of the original Godzilla, a darker tone with the big G actually being the bad guy. No more saving the world, he's back to destroy it. And of course, there's the constant threat of nuclear war, with the Soviets and the Americans constantly aiming missiles at each other, with Japan in the crossfire. It makes for a tense setting, not knowing what will happen between them when a giant lizard comes into the mix. Plus, we get the added bonus of the introduction of the Super X, one of the most iconic human weapons, probably only next to the Maser tanks. And of course, how could we forget the scene that made G fans cry, when Godzilla fell into the volcano and screamed. Not just a roar, a blood-curdling scream of terror. We see our childhood hero die. Of course, only to see him return in the next movie, but still, an emotional scene regardless. I just remember being shocked as a kid that he could actually die from something besides the oxygen destroyer. However, like I had mentioned before, there are some flaws. Some fairly forgettable characters, at least in my eyes. I remember Goro Maki, but I couldn't tell you the name of the other characters. I could still fit them in the scenes and whatnot, and tell you generally who they were, but they just never really stuck with me. But then again, I haven't seen this movie as much as I've seen the other ones, so take that with a grain of salt. It's one of those things where as soon as you'd watch the film again, you'd go, oh yeah, now I remember, and everything just kind of fit into place. Then, there's the fact that in the American dub, there was still some more comedic elements, especially coming from the American cast. We see Burr's character even expressing annoyance and how they aren't taking it seriously. Like, because, as mentioned earlier, he took it seriously himself. This is a point that people either hate or don't really mind. Really, it's to each their own. Some people find it more irritating than others. Aside from that, we get the cheesy effects and whatnot, which, like I said before, were actually taken more seriously than the other ones. They did look good for the times, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily aged the best. But, hey, cheesiness is what makes these movies so enjoyable. And not really a con, or I guess it could be, whichever you want to do. Let's just talk about the Dr. Pepper product placement. It was everywhere! There was just no escape. It was Dr. Pepper here, Dr. Pepper there. It was just everywhere. You could never escape it. Let's say you watch the sub, that is. Overall, Return of Godzilla is probably the best you'll get in this era, aside from Biollante, and it shows. In the movies past Bio, you don't get this same darker tone, and it goes back to being more of a monster romp with very flashy and cheesy effects. I know I don't really have much to say, but that's just because, honestly, it's one of the most solid entries into the franchise. So in a video focusing on the negatives of the Heisei series, this one is definitely an outlier.
Who would have thought a film that script is based off a contest to let a fan enter their own kaijus and scripts would be such a classic and enjoyable part of the franchise? It's been a long time since I've seen this film, and I finally watched it after all these years. I remember just how I love this movie. From the plot, to the effects, to the monsters themselves. It's such an enjoyable watch for me. The plot starts off with two organizations trying to obtain the remaining G cells left behind after Godzilla's reign in 1984. While such is happening, Dr. Shiragami's place of work, which includes G cells, gets blown up, with his daughter Erika still inside. This kills her, and from this, a discussion of a creation of immortal plants, eventually Shiragami will try to save what remains of his daughter. And while this is all going on, the military is working on an anti-nuclear bacteria to combat Godzilla and other nuclear-based attacks to their country. The bacteria will be able to spread and eat up nuclear energy, which is what could make it so deadly to Godzilla, since that's how he survives. Eventually, the other organization that we see at the beginning of the film ends up blowing up the volcano that we see Godzilla fall into in 1984 and letting him free. Kinda odd seeing him free here, since it was such a sad moment in 84, but every time you see him in the volcano and even after he exits, it's almost like it truly never really harmed him or anything like that. Which it kind of takes away the 1984 ending feel, but for someone who watched 84 as its own movie, I doubt it will affect one of the saddest endings in the Godzilla movie, in my opinion. Godzilla begins his journey as he is attacked by the military and their new weapon, the Super X-2. It's kind of odd seeing the Super X out of nowhere, but it still definitely puts up a fight, and it gave us an enjoyable scene in the movie. Eventually, Godzilla overpowers it, and he continues his journey. There's a point where these two agents of the antagonist organization and this Arabian assassin, I think I said that right, which I'll get onto him more later, but they show up at the laboratory where Biollante was being created to look for files, and oh wait, Biollante is evolving into more than a plant. Kind of what happens when you mix Godzilla cells, and begins attacking all three of them. She ends up killing two of the agents, but the assassin ends up getting away, being able to stab his way out of it. Kind of weird scene, honestly. This scene, you can only really see her veins here, and you never really actually see her full form, which I guess it makes it more suspenseful. Because you don't know exactly what she looks like, you just see these veins popping up, and that's all you see. But eventually, she enters a lake next to the building, growing into a massive flower-looking creature. Godzilla ends up showing up and begins battle with it. This is actually a great battle to me. Though slow, but I mean that's pretty traditional for a Heisei battle. It's kind of neat to see Biollante attack Godzilla while in this state. Godzilla obviously overpowers her, sending her into the clouds, and Godzilla continues his journey. I'll note how I like Shiragami's quotes during this fight while he's in the background. He mentions how Godzilla and Biollante are siblings. Just one's a plant, one's an animal. That's really the big difference. The military eventually tried to take on Godzilla again with Super X2, which ends up getting destroyed. What a waste. Its sacrifice is worth it, however, because this gives the soldiers enough time to launch 2 rockets into Godzilla, which inject the bacteria into him. Now, a 3rd rocket ends up getting shot into his mouth because Godzilla roars, and the soldier, which is actually the commander, ends up panicking and spinning around and shooting it into his mouth. The bacteria doesn't really affect Godzilla though, and when they're looking for why, they end up finding out his temperature is the reason why the bacteria isn't working. They have to come up with a plan, and they end up causing a storm to enter the area they're going to attack Godzilla with, and they end up attacking him with everything he got, even in the storm, until they raise his temperature, which lets the bacteria, which shows more effect. Godzilla begins to tire and he starts to slow down. You can see the wear and tear on his body from his temperature rising up in the bacteria, and it gets even more unlucky for him as Biollante decides to reemerge, and she's stronger than she was before and ready to fight. And Godzilla is in a weakened state too. And though a short fight, it's nonetheless an enjoyable one, ending with an atomic blast to the mouth. Biollante heading into space as spores, and Godzilla passing out in the water. And the assassin ends up showing up and killing Shirogami, and a big chase commences, ending with one of the machines used to raise Godzilla's temperature, causing the being set off with the assassin standing on it, causing him to vaporize. Godzilla ends up reawakens, but he's weak and tired, and he just kind of leaves and goes into the ocean. And we don't see him again until he becomes mutated by the submarine in the next film. The characters of this movie are fine, I guess. Their performances aren't remarkable or anything, but it's average for a Godzilla movie. We also see Miki introduced in this movie. I think I said that right. Which really didn't give her much character, and she never really spoke in this movie, which really didn't. But obviously, this changes as the films go. As the later films come in, and she gets more character development throughout the series. Also, the assassin, I thought he was kind of just funny, something I didn't expect first viewing. He literally felt like Terminator or something, even though in the next movie they literally have, like, the Terminator. He didn't even say much. I don't even know if he said anything. He didn't really have to, though. They just kind of gave him a gun, and you just understood the personality of his character. What really shines is the monsters themselves. Godzilla, getting a really drastic change from the 84 suit, and it kind of just turns into the suit that they are base the rest of the Godzilla designs off of, the rest of the Heisei series, even Burning Godzilla. They also introduced one of the coolest creatures in the Godzilla franchise, and definitely in the Heisei series, Biollante, with very unique origins and design, and she ended up becoming one of the most well-known, I guess you could say, characters in the fan base. I don't know if well-known is the word I want to use, but she becomes one of the, she has her mark on the fan base, and she also became one of the most annoyingest characters in Godzilla PS4 because how broke she is. I really love the action scenes in this movie, especially with the military. They had some of the best military action scenes of the whole Heisei series. And something about the final confrontation is just beautiful. Just the rain, the lightning, Godzilla fighting for survival as the military tries to raise his temperature to get the bacteria to work. And just as he begins to weaken and tire, Biollante shows up. It's just something beautiful about that to me. Also, this was the first movie we saw Godzilla use his nuclear pulse throughout the whole franchise. It was definitely didn't look the same as it does in later films, but it was so cool to see. This is another reason, meanwhile, the early part of the Heisei series, like 84 and Biollante, was the best part of the series, as this film in 84 really made Godzilla dark and feel like a menace again. While I can enjoy the other movies, these ones are just better made with the Heisei series and should deserve much more recognition than what they got. Soundtrack's great, the action scenes are enjoyable, the characters aren't annoying, it's never really too slow paced. It is a well-made movie. And if you're a Godzilla fan and you've never seen the movie yet, make sure you watch 84 first and then definitely get this one a viewing, since they were both finally released in America. And overall, it's a very fun and amazing movie, and I definitely recommend you guys check it out.
Godzilla vs. Kangadora. Well, this one is considered a fan favorite for being the one movie where Godzilla finally faced off his arch nemesis by himself, and its well done fight scenes. Its visuals and story are heavily flawed and plagued with continuity errors and inconsistencies given the rest of the series. Starting with the visuals, the special effects for this movie have not aged well at all. While the suits, miniatures, and pretty much every other practical effect are pretty great, the digital effects are what ends up sticking up like a sore thumb. From the supposed holograms of the time travelers to whenever M11 runs, including that hilarious chase scene, and pretty much every green screen effect with a flying object, you'd think they'd try to at least take it seriously given with what little digital effects the last two entries had. Even Chojin Sentai Jetman had better digital effects, and that series came out the same year as this movie. As for the story, the concept of time travel in the Godzilla movie sounds like something out of the Showa era, given that the first two movies are presented as darker stories that are based off of real-world issues. Throughout the whole movie, it plays out as if the Godzilla source from World War II became the Godzilla from the first movie, and so on, as if he wasn't killed by the oxygen destroyer. But it turns out that Godzilla from the past two movies is a different monster from the one in the first movie. There are only 3 scenes that tells this to the audience. The first one being Miki having a vision of Godzilla and how it was the same feeling she had when she encountered him in the previous movie. Second scene being Terasawa examining old news reports of a disappearing Russian submarine in the area where the Godzilla source was teleported to, and Godzilla already being fully grown when he destroyed Shindo's nuclear submarine. But even then, the time travelers call it the second birth of Godzilla, as if he was erased in time in the first place. And 2 government officials act as if Godzilla's heightened growth was the result of him being reborn with modern nuclear power. Which brings me to another problem. If the Japanese government believed Godzilla was erased from history, how could they possibly remember the existence of Godzilla? The only change in history from the time traveling was the creation of Kangadora. Nothing else had a lasting impact throughout the rest of the series. Haven't these producers ever seen a time travel movie before? Even in future installments, the time travel plot was avoided as if it was irrelevant, and plot points that would have been non-existent if the plot line of the original Godzilla being erased in time were brought up, like Baalantai and the use of the oxygen destroyer. Overall, if you need a close examination of specific scenes and other installments in the series to understand a time travel plot that plays a key role in the entirety of a movie, then it's obviously a flawed movie. Now, I'm not saying that you should avoid this movie, as this happens to be one of the most entertaining ones in the Heisei era. If you keep in mind of the convoluted story and lower your expectations, you might enjoy it more.
Godzilla vs. Mothra, 1992. This one is honestly a very poorly done Godzilla film for me. Now I'm going to try my best to explain why I don't care for this film, since it recently made it to the top 5 in Nippon in Japan, and is the highest grossing Heisei Godzilla film. So I'll explain to the best of my ability why I dislike this film. Now with other Godzilla films, even in the Heisei era, such as Biollante, they tend to keep the main reason for me to enjoy a Godzilla movie. It's entertaining. They make me interested throughout and make me want more. Hell, I'm not the biggest fan of Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, and I still find some enjoyment with that movie. Godzilla vs. Mothra, though, doesn't do that for me. It's just so boring and almost all the way through. The plot, while better than the previous one I'd say, is still pretty much bland. It's basically just a watered down version of Mothra vs. Godzilla with some major differences here and there. One of the biggest flaws I have with this film is the final battle. Unlike the first fight, which I enjoyed, this final battle is what I personally call the pinnacle of worst final fights in Godzilla. As with a good chunk of the Heisei movies, with its constant spamming of beams. The beam spamming is at its worst here. Practically all of the fight is a beam spamming fest with some pretty dull melee moments here and there. It's not like Mothra and Batra are incapable of melee combat at all, since Godzilla films in the past and future do that rather well. And Mothra and Batra are less bulky than the other kaiju in the era, so it would make sense for them to use more melee combat than beams to make Godzilla struggle with the two Moths. But instead, we get the beam spam route, which made the fight become very uninteresting real fast. The 92 Godzilla, while still a pretty good incarnation of the King of the Monsters, isn't nearly as memorable or as badass as the Biogoji or Gedogoji incarnations. In fact, if you remove Godzilla from the story completely and change up the script here and there, nothing important would really be changed. It also doesn't help that it feels that he is just there just for the money, which is understandable since that's what a business should do to keep going. But it still feels out of place here, and also doesn't help that the roar here is a major step down in quality, I would say. The Mothra incarnation here is my least favorite of them all, mostly due to her design and not really her actions throughout. I mean, in the same continuity as kaiju such as Biollante and Destroya, two ferocious looking kaiju, you have the fluffy butterfly version of Mothra, which feels awkward here because of how they implemented each kaiju design. Showa works fine since the other kaiju designs weren't exactly ferocious, and in Millennium they changed it up where she fits well without being awkward as hell. But here, it just doesn't work. The only redeemable factor I have for this movie is Batra as a kaiju. He has a neat story, being a battle Mothra who had awoken from a 12,000 year slumber, a great design fitting in well with the other kaiju of the time, and having some neat abilities to counter his enemy soon-to-be ally. Basically, this film just feels like a huge step back in quality for the series, especially since there is a much better film to watch, which feels same as this one. If I recommend this one, it's for completion of seeing all 32 films, and Batra himself. But other than that, watch the original Mothra vs. Godzilla instead. It does its job better as a clash between two of Toho's most popular kaiju, but here, just blah.
Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla from 1993 is the film I have viewed the most in this period, even more than Godzilla 1984 and Godzilla vs. Biollante, mostly because it was always on TV and it was the only Heisei Godzilla movie I owned for a while, yet I cannot help but feel that this is a very forgettable installment. Although I do love the fight at the beginning between Rodan and Godzilla, but everything feels a little boring and that it kind of relies a little too much on the action to keep the viewer entertained. And while the first confrontation between Godzilla and Mechagodzilla wasn't very exciting, the final battle is a very neat special effects show, and it's definitely the big highlight of the movie. Even though it's not as good as 84 and Biollante, the action did take a big step in the right direction. Also, Baby Godzilla doesn't really serve much of a purpose in this film. I know Godzilla's supposed to be looking for him, and I know that he is pretty darn cute, but there's really nothing else to him. He is essentially more of a plot device than an actual character in this film. I know everyone likes to talk about how the Godzilla series is known for having uninteresting characters, but I feel like this film kinda suffers a lot from it. There isn't much variety among them. It's either G-Force or a scientist, and Miki is really the only one everyone remembers because, I mean, she's in almost every other Heisei Godzilla movie. And there's also this dinosaur boy character, whatever his name was. As for Mechagodzilla, in a movie that's supposed to serve as a reboot to the character, they kinda took a step down when compared to the Mechagodzilla from the 70s. Luckily, this is greatly improved upon for Mechagodzilla in the Millennium era. Also, aside from the action special effects, my absolute favorite thing about the Heisei era is how it uses its cinematography. Every shot of the monsters allows you to feel the weight of the scene with unique angles. The Heisei era has arguably the best cinematography in the franchise. In the end, the best way to watch this film, as well as most of the Heisei Godzilla films, is to kinda just sit back and watch it go. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla from 1993 is quite an entertaining flick, but it's certainly not the mother of all Godzilla adventures as the DVD wants us to believe. It may be flawed, but the action definitely makes up for it. Overall, it's your typical Godzilla movie. It's above average, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's honestly worth a watch. And I think we can all agree that there is no denying that the opening song is just absolutely incredible. Also, did you know that this was originally going to be the last Heisei Godzilla movie? Well, this will be pretty evident as you notice how the rest of the series in this era takes major steps down in terms of quality.
Oh boy, the near the end of the barrel. I don't even know where to begin without sounding like a jumbled up mess. I at least can point out that this film isn't really regarded by many fans to be the best at all. So I guess I want to get too much shit for, smacking this film around. But I no longer consider it the worst. For the longest time, I found this film to be quite awful, but comparing it to the next film, which is going to be done by my good friend Mifune, it's not that bad or boring. The film does have its own charm to it, such as the island setting, the score, comedic moments, and the feeling the most like a Jufukuda film out of the entire Heisei era. But in the end, the film is still lacking in terms of quality. The film does have fun characters though, something you would see in a Jufukuda type film, but the reason I'm going to complain and bitch and moan and whine about this is because the film goes out of focus several times throughout the film. There are many times in this film where it just stops to focus on a side plot that isn't really at all interesting. The film never really explains what he means by power, nor do I really give a shit about the entire subplot as a whole. Nothing is new to the table here besides Mickey's brand new powers. This really comes out of nowhere, and we never see it in the next film. Mickey had a capability of reading others' thoughts, and was used to be the connection between monster and man. But once I saw her levitate without any hint at that whatsoever, made me so confused. We never seen that in films before and after. So why now? Why does she out of nowhere just have these abilities? The main two male leads aren't anything new, but aren't anything bad either. They're fun and easy to watch and never do anything that distracts the plot, besides Kayoshi's out-of-place grudge against Godzilla at the very end. When it comes to Space Godzilla's origin, which I know spit out left field for this overall review, it's a confusing mess. Continuity issues to the side, the origin for Space Godzilla is beyond outlandish. White holes? Really? But overall, the film's plot and characters aren't offensive, but aren't anything great either. The only bad thing the characters do is stop the film and complete a side plot, or have weird character changes or motivations. The plot itself is a jumbled mess that doesn't stay consistent, and takes too many detours before going towards the main focus of the film. When it comes to the special effects, I might have to say it is the worst in the entire Heisei era. With Godzilla's suit falling apart, and the awful looking Mothra vs. Space Godzilla space fight, redundant I know, this film doesn't really have much redeemable qualities. With the Godzilla suit, or what it's officially dubbed as, the Moge Goji suit, there's not much to say about it in terms of design. It's fine while not being anything great. To me, the Bio Goji suit will always be the best. But there are several times throughout the film where the suit kind of falls apart and has an overly large finger at some scenes. It's weird and it just seems to not have the best quality control, but it's most certainly not the worst Godzilla suit. When it comes to Space Godzilla's suit, it's neat looking, but it barely moves, which is probably one of the bigger problems with the Heisei era as a whole. The monsters usually give one hell of a light show, spotlights in the air, fireworks exploding, everything, but they barely move or fight close range. People might excuse this by saying they're giant monsters. They're supposed to move slow, but I heavily disagree. You can make a monster look big and still make them move at a decent pace. But the Heisei era as a whole seems to care more about style than they do with substance. Little Godzilla's design overall kind of f***s up continuity. The reason why I say this is because when you compare this suit with the films before and after, it's the odd one out. So when you see Baby Godzilla and Godzilla Jr. together, they seem to be much more in line to overall what they're trying to do with the overall design. They're dinosaurian looking, and they overall have decent proportions. Little Godzilla out of nowhere, I don't know what the hell are they thinking about that. Mothra might be the coolest and most fun design out of the four. While the original design is great, it desired a much needed update. The new Mothra is probably why I keep returning to this film. It moves decently, can transform, and has a large array of weapons. This is what the 93 Mechagodzilla should have been in the first place. Bottom line is, this film is extremely flawed with only a few redeeming qualities. I can't really hate it because of me being a fan of the franchise, but I really don't like it. Hell, I even say that 1998 is better than this flick. 4 out of 10.
Arguably one of the most beloved movies in the entire franchise, Godzilla vs. Destroyer is one of those few Godzilla movies that is pretty much universally loved by fans of many generations. It is one of the, so to say, big movies of the franchise, the kind that many fans would tout out as one of the best of all time, and one that they would show to non-fans saying that this is one of the movies that you should watch, one of the definitive Godzilla movies, one of the all-time greats. It is considered what many would call to be one of the big movies of the franchise, the kind that fans would tout as one of the best of all time, the kind that they would show to non-fans telling them that this is one of the definitive Godzilla movies. And even me myself, I even enjoyed it very much when I was a kid, looking upon it with much reverence and enjoyment overall. However, as time has gone on and I have looked upon this movie more and more and reflected upon my opinions of it, I unfortunately feel that this movie is not worthy of much of the praise it has begotten from the fandom. In fact, I will go a step further and say that I feel that Godzilla vs. Destroyer really represents some of the overall worst qualities of the entire Godzilla franchise. From all aspects, the writing, the characterization, the direction, and the effects work, it really, in my opinion, shows a low point from Toho's effort. From its conception, its production, and its execution, I feel that this movie really represents an overall very mediocre and bottom-of-the-barrel effort. To start, many people believe this movie is worthy of praise for how it handled the death of Godzilla and for choosing to end the franchise with some sense of reverence or grace. I want to begin by dispensing with this right away. Godzilla doesn't die in this movie because Toho believed that the franchise was worthy of a reverent send-off, but by purely monetary reasons. 2, in fact. Toho was very frustrated by the fact that Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 1993 and Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla 1994, despite being some of the top-earning domestic releases of their years and being among some of the higher-grossing Godzilla movies, did not make as much as the then record-breaking Godzilla vs. Mothra 1992, so they wanted something to push the next film to make even more money. Hence why the line, "Godzilla dies," was excessively promoted throughout this movie's marketing. In addition, Toho wanted to finish the franchise off before the then proposed American Godzilla film was to be released in 1996, originally 1994, which is why the original intention was to have the franchise end with Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 1993, but delays made Toho make more movies to fill the gap. These facts are elaborated on and explained by information provided in books and articles written by David Callett, J.D. Lees, and an interview with Toho English scriptwriter and actor Andrew Smith. Now to discuss the actual qualities of the film. First off, direction. I'm rather surprised how dull and lifeless the overall direction and cinematography of the human scenes are, considering that this is the third Godzilla movie by Takao Kawara, and both of his prior efforts, Godzilla vs. Mothra 1992 and Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 1993, exhibit some level of professionalism and experience, whereas here it looks like none of that experience was brought along. Everything from the camera movement, framing, and the way shots are handled just come across as lifeless and stale. Some moments that exemplify this for me are any scene involving a boardroom and how the camera frames each shot and how the lighting is arranged just to feel so... It just doesn't feel very standard and, like I said before, very lifeless and overall very dull and uninteresting. Compared with shots and scenes from other Heisei movies, even with the last two, which also had boardroom scenes, this just feels like a major step down in almost every regard. My second point is the characters. These characters come across as among the most, if not the most, basic and shallow lead characters to ever be in the series. Which by that I mean that they have very little memorable or distinguishable personalities or qualities that make them really stand out in any way. Our lead character, Dr. Lee Joo-in, plays the traditional scientist role who at some point is asked to use his creation in a way that's against his intentions, but this goes nowhere. He has none of the tragedy or gravitas as prior characters to take on this scientific role like Dr. Serizawa or Dr. Mifune, or even Dr. Miyajima from the original Godzilla vs. Mecha. His co-stars aren't much better. Yukari and Kenichi Yamane exist to serve as a connection to characters from the original film, but aside from that, their characters are very basic and flat beyond regular female reporter or young nerdy scientist. A far cry from the similar roles played by actors like Ryuko Hoshi and Akira Kubo in the Showa series. Miki Saigusa is perhaps the worst here in terms of lost potential. Her job is mostly just to serve as exposition and look sad. She could have had potential to really be given a shining moment in development, when given the choice of whether to send Junior to destroy or to lure Godzilla. But this is all undermined by the fact that the new and equally underdeveloped character of Miruzawa is a psychic and can pretty much do the job without her, making Miki all but irrelevant, and really robbing her of a potential really good character developing moment. There's also a small role in the film where we get to see Momoko Kochi, the actress who played Emiko in the original 1954 Godzilla, return in this movie to say some dialogue about the danger of micro-oxygen and how it relates to the original oxygen destroyer. While I do admit it is nice to see this actress from the original Godzilla to come back after so many years, it just comes across as an attempt to link itself to the original film in order to try and give itself some sense of being better than it is. Almost like it's linking to a much better movie and therefore it's elevating its own quality, or it tries to elevate its own quality through that. With regards to acting, it's hard to exactly determine which of this is due to the actors, the direction, or just how badly the characters are written. But all of the performances, sans a few like Akira Nakao's General Aso, come across as flat and lacking very little emotion or even interest at times. Everyone just seems rather blasé most of the time, which is really unfitting for a movie where the end of the world is supposed to be happening and you have Godzilla who is about to cause all of this destruction by his meltdown, but most people just seem to be very disinterested in this film. In my opinion, effects do not really have influence on how well a story is told or how good its characters can be, most of the time. But here I believe Destroyer represents an absolute low point for this era. Yes, I believe this is lower than the asteroid scene in Space Godzilla, lower than the poor attempts to make kaiju like Kangadora and Mothra fly, and worse than the terrible inconsistencies between animatronics and water suits faces, like in Mothra and Mechagodzilla 2. Why exactly? Well, it just seems so, for lack of a better word, dull here. For all the flack the Heisei series gets for its beam spamming and heavy suits, they at least can make a battle look very colorful and even a bit intricate with its usage of lighting and beam effects. Here, the major battles towards the end of the film just seem so routine and half-hearted. Godzilla and Destroyer don't do much beyond firing beams, bumping into each other to simulate fighting, and knocking each other over for most of the fight. They don't even try to hide the fact that the ceiling set lights are the main source of lighting for this fight, and that it takes place in a flat airport without any recognizable or interesting features or locales. Also, some effects come off as very lazy, like the immobile toy, at least that's what it looks like, used for the smaller junior scenes, or the fact that they used Bandai destroyers for the scene in which the minis attacked the Japanese self-defense forces with the freezer cannons. Honestly, the best scene and action sequence in the film is with the destroyers in the building with the SWAT team. Yes, it's obviously ripped off from James Cameron's Aliens, and yes, the destroyers are in and of themselves very immobile and bulky, which leads to some confusion over their agility. But it is a very, admittedly, cool scene and actually shows some effort. Also, for being the ultimate big bad of the Heisei series, Destroyer comes across as a very big letdown for me. He comes across as more of an inconvenience and nuisance to Godzilla rather than a credible threat, with the only real big villainous thing he does being killing Junior by dropping him on the airport. He seems more like a giant pest who can reform, but not really a clear and present danger to Godzilla. Now, obviously, I could talk for hours about why I don't like this movie, getting into all the nitty-gritty details of scenes and frames, and just overall things I don't like about this, and why I feel that it's, in my opinion, overrated by the fandom. But I feel that these are the main big points. And for me personally, it's such a shame that the Heisei series began with such promise and with some A-caliber effort by the people behind 1984 and Biollante, only to end where I believe is the worst point of the series, a culmination of the worst ideas and tropes this era had all in one movie.
Here are the scores from each of us for each movie in this era. As you can see, there is a big step down in quality after Godzilla vs. Kangadora, but did start to climb back up, only to go back down in the end. And you can tell some of us have differing opinions for each film. In the end, as fans of this franchise, we could care less about how good these movies are, but the enjoyment we all get out of them. Everybody has their favorite Godzilla movie, and every Godzilla movie has a charm that always brings us back for more. If anything, these films are merely just chapters of one of our favorite stories in cinema history. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for helping me reach over 1,000 subscribers. Feel free to contribute to liking or sharing this video, spreading the word about me, or just subscribe to my channel. You can also comment your thoughts on this video if you'd like, and I would love to give a special thanks to Takatsu, Killswitch, Daikaiju Tony, the Chad Baltan, Dillafellow, and Kayoko Ann Patterson, also known as Dr. Mifune on Instagram, for working on this video with me. Links to their channels will be in the description, and be sure to check them out. I had such a blast with this collaboration, and it was so much fun. Love you guys, see you later, and here's to 1,000 more.